Well folks, it's Kangaroo Point time. We're going looking for Cox, Robert Cox. Well, bits of him anyway. It's dark, it's so dark. We're probably going to have to do some of this in French. Anyway, let's go. Well, history buffs, here we are. We're heading through the city at night this time, flying on instruments, and we're not going far, just here, Kangaroo Point. And this whole area we're looking at here, this tiny little area under the bridge, is where all of this took place. One of Brisbane's more grisly murders, there's no question of that, but probably a little unsolved, and definitely a long time ago. But there's still clues in the landscape that we can have a look at. Oh, there's the old Star Trek convention down there, Rob. Live long and prosper, dudes. Anyway, let's get on with it. There's a bit to get through, but it should be fun. Well, first of all, let's work out what this video isn't. It's not about this nutjob, Patrick Mayne, or this lovely old grandmother, Rosie Seaman from Burner, who wrote what is a pretty awesome book called The Mayne Inheritance, which I don't completely agree with, but it is a good book. It's about what is recorded to have happened and when it happened. Make your own mind up. You'll know what I think at the end. But so we're talking about the murder of Robert Cox, about a story written by Rosie Seaman. By the way, before she got married, her name was None. The jokes just write themselves. Sorry guys, let's move on. Now I told you earlier, this story is so dark and so macabre and scary that we're going to have to at least explain some of it to you in French.
Le 26 mars 1848, à 7h30 du matin, un dimanche matin ensoleillé d'automne, un batelier qui descendait la rivière à la rame fut horrifié d'observer un corps mutilé allongé sur les rives de la rivière. Il se trouvait sous le jardin de Monsieur Rankin et à une courte distance du Bushin et probablement sur son côté nord-est. La police a été appelée et le constable en chef Fitzpatrick et le gendarme de district Murphy se sont rendus sur les lieux.
Now what else this video is not is a history of Kangaroo Point. That's already been done by Rob over at Walkabout with Rob, and link down below. There's always a link to Rob's channel down below, but that video is really worth watching. It's fun. It's a good video. He did a great job, Rob. Appreciate that. So anyway, let's get on with the murder of Robert Cox. As you just heard from the nice French person, this guy was cut up into a number of pieces and done fairly well, apparently. So the only thing we know, we don't know who did it. We don't know why they did it. But I think we can presume it wasn't suicide. So Constable Fitzpatrick and Constable Murphy, thought it might have been Constable Fitzgerald there, but anyway. Fitzpatrick said the body was severed in two across the loins. The arms and the torso were in the grass about 3 metres from the upper part of the body. Now, I'll bet you London to a brick he didn't say 3 metres. I'm reading this. 3 metres? I don't think so. He wouldn't know what a metre was. Anyway, a deep cut had been made to the right side of the breast, severing the ribs. A small cut was made to the left side and the head was deficient, missing. The entrails were hanging from both portions. The upper part of the body was lying below the high water mark and just above the low water mark. The arms and torso were in the grass some 3 metres away. There's those metres again. I bet he didn't say that. The tide was running in rapidly and would have quickly covered the mutilated remains. Close inspection of the deceased trouser pocket revealed a sixpence with a small dent in it. Interesting. Yeah, well, okay, we know it wasn't suicide. Someone really went to town on this guy, and he was butchered. He wasn't just killed, he was butchered. Now, everyone here was a butcher. They all worked at the abattoirs, you know, all of them. So that's not going to really be a thing. This is something used against Patrick Mayne later. Oh, he was a butcher. They were all butchers. And he had a heap of money. He must have got it off these guys. These guys couldn't have bought you a drink. They were living on credit as it was, working in an abattoir, working in a rendering works, one of the hardest jobs there was. If he had a pocket full of cash, he would not have been doing that. So yeah, that's not worth anything, I don't think. Anyway, so they sent a guy down the well, up the road to have a look, and what did they find in the well? Well, they found the rest of the entrails that were missing. They found a knife, a bloodied knife, strangely enough, and a pile of bloodied shirts. Now, Fife, by this time, was awakened, and he was found to have blood on him. Of course, back in those days, blood was blood. Whether it was sheep blood, cow blood, dog blood, or human blood, it was blood. So he was arrested. And Patrick Mayne gave evidence to say that they weren't drunk, but Fife said they were drunk, and it just went on. And Patrick Mayne was definitely there. But, you know, when you look at the evidence, it's more than likely that Fife did this. There were people gave a lot of evidence. It was a court of law. Yeah, okay, they weren't what they are today, and the police weren't as experienced. This is a gruesome murder. The cops would have been shocked by it themselves. So anyway, I would suggest you have a read of The Mayne Inheritance. If you haven't done so, it's a good book, and what she says makes an awful lot of sense. I just don't think she's right. But, you know, still a good book. I got good value out of it. I thought it was great. And there's no question, Patrick Mayne was a raving nutjob. And all this about his kids didn't breed because they didn't want to pass on the lunacy gene. I don't believe a word of it. I don't think the kids bred because they were homosexuals, is the correct answer. And in those days, being a homosexual and a medical doctor was a license to go to prison. So I would think that was more than likely what was going on there. And they were good people. They kept to themselves. They splashed a shitload of cash around in Brisbane, University of Queensland, and many, many other things. So, you know, the Wesley, Morelands, all that stuff. I don't go into that here. Anyway, let's have a bit more of a look at this. Let's have a look at some of the geography over there and why it is what it is. Because, you know, there's still T-Rocks after all. So when you see these old photographs, you often see the tip of Kangaroo Point missing. This is from about the 1880s, and as you can see, there's a big lagoon here. And that was almost certainly there in the time when these murders happened in 1848. Here it is again. This is a diagram, it's a drawing, but it's the same time frame. And the reason it's there is this. Kangaroo Point, as Rob points out to, has got tuff in it. That's the green. The purple is shale, Brisbane shale, and the yellow is just gravel. just river sediment sitting on top of this stuff. So of course it comes and goes. It washes in and washes out. Now we've stabilised it all now with rock walls or whatever. Probably won't happen again. You never know. Those floods are pretty awesome. Well folks, Kangaroo Point again. We're just going through the heritage listed shelter over at Holman Street. Now, the events we're talking about were in 1848. And balls, we'll just run with three men. A bloke called Robert Cox, a guy called Fife, and a guy of course called Patrick Mayne. This street wouldn't have been called Holman Street then, it would have been called Ferry Street, because there was a ferry here that ran over to the city. So we're going to go up here. You've already seen during the video before this, you've already seen a fair bit. Let's go and look at the actual places. That'll be fun. Well folks, we're on the corner of Holman and Mayne Street here. The big old trees there I used in one of my recent videos. And that block of units there is at the approximate location of the Bush Inn, or Sutton's Inn. This was a little laneway, and over here there was a big garden, market garden, run by Mr. Rainier. And then we came down, and where that big worksite is now was actually a lagoon. You'll see that as well in some of the photographs. Let's go and have a look though. Now there are no contemporaneous photographs, diagrams of this area in 1848. There are some not long after that, maps at least. So the Bush Inn was surrounded by a fence. In the backyard just here there was a stable, but just behind that stable, which I presume is somewhere over there at the back of that car park, there was a well. And yeah, there wasn't a pussy in the well. It was a lot more than that. Anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. There's the pylons for the Story Bridge, people. You can probably hear the traffic in the background. Again, we can see that car park there. Now behind that car park, behind the well, there was a new building being built just behind this here, and it was a rendering works. It was being expanded, and that was where they found poor old Mr. Cox's head in the rendering works. They found his entrails in the well, along with a knife and a few bloodied shirts just there, and his head was found there. However, the rest of him was somewhere else altogether. Over here, at the bottom of the garden, on the riverbank, was where they found his legs and his upper torso with his arms still attached to it. So let's go and have a look at that, because we're here. So now we have a fairly nice sandy beach forming here, because we no longer dredge the river. Over there's Petrie Bight, where Petrie's works were. And walking along here, you would not know the dark secrets that this place holds. And of course, the coastline wasn't quite here, because this was a lagoon in front of us, and this was the bottom of a garden run by Mr. Rainier. He grew bananas, pineapples, and I would suspect he grew anything that he could sell over in Brisbane, which is a good thing. So just here on the foreshore, which is probably not where we're standing, it's not where it is now, it's probably where we're standing, was found the legs and the arms and the upper torso of poor Mr. Robert Cox. right here. So that wasn't a particularly nice January morning for the people around here, the poor constables that had to deal with it, the locals who found him, and then all the locals who were implicated in one way or another, then slowly dismissed as suspects. And in the end, Fife was arrested. Well, there was quite a few people arrested, but Fife was the one that got sent up to the beak. A grand jury was formed, and he was sent to Sydney, where he was tried, he was found guilty, and he was executed. So the conjecture that Mayne gave false evidence, therefore causing Fife to be executed incorrectly, it's a conjecture. Pretty heavy in Rosie Seaman's book, Simon. I may be mispronouncing that for comedic relief. But even so, it's possible. It's not impossible. Is it likely? I don't think so. But the big problem is, why did these men get to this? Now, they were all butchers, they were all working in abattoirs and rendering sheds. So they most certainly had the capability of cutting someone up like a sheep, which is what was done here, was quartered. Exactly what they would do to sheep before they threw them into the rendering vat. So they all had the skills. Knives, everyone had knives, they were everywhere. Access to it, motivation, well, someone puts forward the motivating factor that Mayne did it to steal money off these guys. Well, these guys had no money. They're working on two of the hardest jobs you could do in Brisbane, abattoirs and rendering. I just doubt if they had hundreds of pounds on them. The fact that a few years later Mayne shows up with £300 to buy the butcher shop, she uses as some form of evidence. Well, I find that to be just not evidence. He got it from somewhere. He might have killed someone to get it, but I doubt if it was Robert Cox. Now, one thing that's hardly discussed is that Cox and Fife were old friends. Cox and Fife were prisoners together under Patrick Logan, the raging psychopath, Patrick Logan. So you'd wonder how things would come apart this much, but it so did, because, you know, he obviously didn't kill himself, so someone did it, and Fife was the most likely person. Fife lied about being drunk. Fife was found covered in blood, goodness knows what blood, in his bed, asleep, where Cox had been. So there's always been some interaction between Fife and Cox. Fife can't remember, conveniently, etc., etc. This was in 1848. This is nearly 200 years ago, so we don't have to get our Sherlock Holmes hat on just for this one. So we're standing now where that lagoon was. So that garden was between here and the Story Bridge foundations over there. And we were in the end of a lagoon here. And several years ago, it was a lagoon again, of a different type. Floods come through here, big time. Anyway, that's our spooky look at Kangaroo Point. I'm here at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, because it gets busy here. And even at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, it's busy. So I think we need to go back to T-Rocks, back in the T-Rocks World Headquarters, and we'll sign off from there. Well, here we are back at the studio, folks. This is the path that turns into Main Street. This was Main Street, surveyed on the early maps. Something that's not mentioned, briefly touched upon in Rob's video. These are not the first murders that happened at Kangaroo Point. Definitely not, because in the early days of the colony, in the 1830s, they were growing maize and they were growing wheat here, right here where I'm standing. And the Aboriginal people knew that these people were knocking off their land, and to get rid of them, they need to take their food away. So they'd come down and raid this, they'd burn it, they'd destroy the crops, and a number, of course not recorded, of Aboriginal people were murdered, shot out of hand by the early settlers. So they're your first murders at Kangaroo Point. We don't know who did it, we don't know how many of them were killed, but it certainly happened. Anyway, that's it. Enough murdering. Something more positive next time. Jewellery, gold. It's going to be fun. Keep rocking. T-Rock's out.